Good morning and good afternoon, actually, depending on where you are. We're having as a guest today Andrew Brady, and it's a great pleasure to welcome him to our regular Meet the Offer monthly events at Women Heart to Heart. We meet with authors of books which matter to us and to our purpose to discuss different subjects connected to the evolution of our workplaces, to the role of women, and other important themes. And it's especially an honor to have Andrew Brady today. So actually, your book is still forthcoming, right? So it's a
It is.
pleasure to
Couple
it's a
months to wait.
so it's a pleasure actually to be introducing people to it, and I hope many people buy it. The way it happened is I stumbled upon a post of yours, and there was a picture which said it was you and then the evolution of business, and the evolution was capitalized first four letters, which were showing the word love, and I immediately. Um, Told me that you're somebody we should be talking to because we are also of the belief that love has a place in the workplace, and not just a place, but it's a leading role. So before we go into that, can you please tell a few words about yourself?
Yes, so I'm located right now in upstate New York. This is actually this book that I'm writing right now is kind of a career's worth so far career, I guess, of the work that I've been doing. So really, about 10 years ago, started working with organizations on what I call evolving them towards a more conscious way of doing business, and love is definitely a part of the work that we do. And we've along the way, I know that we're going to talk a little bit about conscious capitalism, because that's definitely interwoven, and conscious capitalism is a worldwide movement, and so these organizations are showing that by bringing love into the workplace, and not only inside your company but also for the all of the stakeholders that surround and support your company, that these companies actually in the long run end up being more successful. They're more resilient, they're more sustainable, and they're doing great things for the world, while also making healthy returns. And so I have been involved in this movement locally. We have a chapter here in Rochester, New York, but there's 50 chapters around the world. So I'd encourage you, after we're done, to go to consciousnapitalism.org and see if there's a chapter that you can get involved with locally. But also, you probably have an opportunity, at least while so much is virtual, where you can join a lot of virtual meetings that are going on, just like this one, where there's people from countries all over the place. So it's really an honor to be here, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about what it means to evolve business in a more loving way.
Beautiful, thank you. I wanted to start with talking about millennials because you are millennial, right?
I am, for
You're a
better or
proud
worse.
one, proud one. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how, in general, millennials feel about the current workplaces. We all know they're not. I mean, they're kind of trying to to evolve them or revolutionize them because they're not happy with everything they've inherited, so to say. But tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, you use a great word there, that what they've inherited, right? What we've inherited, and in so many ways, there's actually one of the things that really got me going on writing this book was there was a study that was done. It was I think in 2016. It was a Harvard study where they basically were looking at millennials, and basically their support of capitalism. And the big headline was that a majority of millennials now reject capitalism as the best way to organize our economy. And when you look at it, what we've inherited, as you said, it's not too hard to see why. There's historic levels of inequality, and we've also proven that we're doing all of these things in a way that's unsustainable for the planet. And so I think that there's a lot of disillusionment. And I also think that, you know, sometimes the millennials, they get a bad rap for any number of things, like that they hop around to jobs more often, which I've actually seen research that shows that they don't move jobs any more often than other generations did at the similar ages. And that's kind of follows a lot of research that I've seen that really shows that it's not as much a generational divide as it is really that there's divides just in terms of what most people are like when they're you know, young in their careers. Although I will say that for many millennials, kind of that first experience in the business world of the financial crisis, and that I was just coming out of college when all of that happened. And so, you know, that does make you a little bit more I don't know, wary, I guess. In you know, in some ways, you can't necessarily blame them for having maybe a little bit less loyalty to a company when companies, you know, aren't showing much loyalty going back in the other direction.
Mm. Thank you so much for that, because I also believe it's not so much about millennials as much as it's about people who see things differently, want more for themselves and for others. And it's also a combination. You're right that youth has a youth in, I mean, young people in any age are always they're the revolutionaries. They're usually on the barricades when there's change is needed. Uh, but also, um, it's largely about, I mean, we're more informed today. I think that if 20 years ago we knew as much as we know today, we would also be acting differently, because there's so much, the information age has brought a lot of knowledge about things that are being done. So that also pushes us to seek change. And I want to ask you, you mentioned something. So in a way, the world now is divided in, I would say, I don't want to polarize here because I don't think polarization works, but just for the sake of making a point, there's a lot of cynicism of people who think that nothing can be changed, nothing depends on us. There's also kind of passive acceptance that that's the way it is, and nothing. I mean, again, nothing depends on us, but without that, so much cynicism. And then there is other group of people who I would call them a little bit more idealistic. So it's seeking some new beginning, new way of doing things. And from the point of view of the cynicists, the idealists look naive. So in your opinion, what is in your experience, your proof, so to say, that this is not idealism, but it's possible? And as you're saying, it gives results. So what is your experience with that?
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons that I use the evolution metaphor, because I call evolution, it's the world's longest running experiment. You know, it's been going for quite a long time, and so it can show us a lot about cooperation, about longevity, about resilience, and many people, you know, it needs a little bit of a marketing, you know, makeover, because I think many people, when they think about evolution, they think about you know, the ways that there's what they'll call social Darwinism, right? Like they think about it in a negative way, where it's you know, dog eat dog sort of a world. But evolution, you know, over the long run, it actually shows in many ways quite the opposite. That cooperation is what leads to thriving in the long run. And so the one example that I like to use quite a bit is around peacocks. And does anybody know why the peacock has such a large tail?
No, no, me
So
no.
so
So
yeah, so it's trying to attract a mate. And so, you know, the peahens, they can't take the peacocks to the doctor to get a full checkup before they decide on a mate. But the size of the tail is actually a pretty good metric for, you know, how healthy it is, and that it has good genes, and that it was, you know, well fed and enough that it could grow this large tail. But what actually you know, happened over time, over successive generations, was that the peacock grew a larger and larger and larger tail and it actually shifted its metabolic energy away from the actual measures of health, the long-term growth and repair of their cells and all of their organs and all of those things, and it shifted instead to grow the largest tail. So now we're at a point where the peacocks with the largest tail are no longer the healthiest peacocks. It's all for show. They've put all their energy into that most visible sign of success without really looking at some of the underlying factors of health and success. And similarly, we do that all the time in our businesses. When yes, profits, they can show us a pretty good metric for a successful company, that we have a product that people want, or a service, or whatever the case may be. But if all you focus on then is those profits, it's pretty easy to game the system, to change things around, to try to make that profit number rise as much as possible without actually meaning that you have a healthy company. And we do the same thing at the country level, by measuring GDP and caring only about that metric. So when you over focus on any one thing, it kind of gets distorted, because there's all different kinds of things that get included in our GDP metrics that aren't necessarily the things that create thriving loving human beings. And so that is a part of the problem as well. So then to shift the
So sorry, there was some. Okay, yes, thank you. You were
sorry, that just
muted for
popped
a
up.
second.
That wasn't
Yeah.
that wasn't muted the whole time, was I?
No. Just the
Okay.
last couple of words. Yes.
Yes. So there was an experiment done by an evolutionary biologist by the name of William Muir at Purdue University in the 70s, and he was trying to evolve a super flock of chickens. He's trying to basically to increase the productivity for agriculture. And so what he did, he had six different coops, and he in the first round of the experiment, he selected from each of those six coops the most individually productive chicken. And so whichever chicken had the most or the largest eggs, he would breed those for successive generations, hoping that he would build this super flock of of high productivity. And what actually happened was, after 6 generations, the collective productivity had actually gone down, and many of the chickens were no longer even alive. Surprisingly, what he found was that it wasn't necessarily, when he was selecting what he thought was the most productive, what he was actually selecting for was the most aggressive. These chickens that were showing the most productivity, they were getting that way because they were, for example, pecking away at their neighbors or stealing food from their neighbors. And so he was selecting for aggression, and many of them, and this super aggressive flock, many of them started pecking away at each other, and you can find pictures of it online of how unhealthy these chickens were. So what he did in a follow-up experiment was, rather than selecting the most productive individual from each of the six coops, he actually took the most productive coop collectively, and bred that over successive generations. So this was a more cooperative coop, where the hens were sharing, and they were getting along decently with their neighbors. And what he found over six successive generations in that version of the experiment was that he increased the egg productivity by 40%. And more different kinds of stories are being shown, in terms of trees, and the ways that trees in an ecosystem share their nutrients, and that's really what leads to long-term resilience and success. Because if one set of trees is in the shade, and they can't get the nutrients they need, they actually end up transporting it underground to neighboring trees, and they recognize that maybe a couple years later, maybe those trees will be able to pay us back. And there's kind of this resiliency that gets created when we're cooperating and when we're working together. And so that's what we really need to focus on in terms of business, is not just focusing on that profit metric, or not just focusing at the country level on maximizing GDP, and all of the negative things that come when we try to maximize that to really the detriment of overall health, but also recognizing that the more that we do cooperate, even if there's a little bit of give and take in the short run, that it ends up creating win-win opportunities in the long run.
Thank you for these examples. We also take a lot of inspiration from nature, and nature is really our biggest teacher. And there's so much to learn about ourselves, actually, looking at other species. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, I was at one point of time because I was at some point disappointed with how very large organizations, especially publicly traded organizations, can evolve, because there's certain structure that is put in place in terms of reporting constantly to shareholders and expecting constant growth, that it's very difficult to change. And I was at some point hoping that it's the new startups, it's the world of startups, purpose-driven startups, that actually are gonna bring this new way of working. I was very optimistic about that until I kind of dive deeper into the startup world to realize that actually well-being is at a low, it is a very low level in a lot of startups, because people are working with passion. So as a result, very often there's burnouts, even depression that people are not talking about. So on one side, we're very I mean, very often in corporations, there's higher standards of actually work environment than in startups. That's one side of the story. And the other side of the story is what I've experienced over and over again, is that when startups scale up, so when they become big and successful, many of them fall back into the existing ways of doing business, because there's not so much track record of how to get organized. So we go back and look at what other big companies have done. So what are your thoughts on that, and how can we help? I'm interested also on behalf of our community, because we are we're going through several processes now of development, which at the end we look at ourselves as future ecosystems for a lot of new like projects and programs and companies. We would be supporting women with coming up with new projects and then creating environment to um, just one second, sorry, because I'm also the host, so there was, okay, I'm gonna. So we would be also supporting women in doing new businesses, and we ourselves will be doing projects. So I'm wondering, what is your thought in that regard? How can we? What do people need to learn about? How can we support each other to really be creating this new type of workplaces?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it becomes so difficult to have a different way of doing business when you're put in an economy or in an environment or in some kind of organization where it's really unhealthy. You feel like you have to swim upstream in against the current to be able to focus on well-being. One of the things that I've really come to recognize, because I similarly I do a lot of work with organizations on trying to what I say, not just embrace your purpose and have that fancy plaque on the wall or the page on your website of your purpose and your values, but how do you actually integrate that into the ways that you're hiring and you're promoting and you're developing leaders and all of these different elements. And one of the things that I was similarly discouraged by early on, kind of working with some of these organizations, is, as you're mentioning, they're only focused on growth. So they, growth, especially when you're a young company, growth can be a good thing. But if you are focused on growth, for any of us, if any of us, when we were young, we were all happy about, oh, I grew a couple inches this year, when you go to the doctor. But when you become an adult, if you go to the doctor and they say that you got a growth, well, that's not a good thing, right? Like nothing in nature, similar, back to the nature example, nothing in nature grows forever. And companies go through a growth spurt, many times when they're young, but then what happens is eventually, they're going to hit some kind of a plateau. And as you're mentioning, they have all these incentives that basically show them that is a bad thing, and that they've somehow failed. And instead, it really needs to be normalized, because those sorts of things are not only natural, but can be healthy. And instead, if when they're expected to grow at that point that they're starting to plateau, that's oftentimes when they start to do, so many different things that you see companies do to, try to boost their share price, for example, like companies that'll do a lot of share buybacks. And so they will take their extra money, and rather than innovating, they'll buy their shares back to boost their stock price, because so many executives have their executive pay tied to that. So there are some kind of broader structural things that need to change so that it's not so difficult to run a business in this conscious way. But one thing I will say is that, when you're a small startup company, it can be really exciting. It's like you and your friends working out of the garage, sort of a mentality, and it's all exciting. And then you get into this growth mode, and so growth is a really exciting and motivating thing. But if you get to that point, and all you've had up to that point is the growth as a purpose, when those companies hit that plateau, they start to fall apart. Because people don't have that motivation anymore. And so that's really one of the things that I try to talk with many leaders that I work with, especially of those growing companies, is even though you feel like you don't have time right now to to clarify your purpose and come up with it, there's actually, many of you may have heard the name Tony Hsieh. He unfortunately passed away just a couple weeks ago. But he was
Really?
the
I know him, yes.
Yeah, he was the CEO of Zappos, and I quote him all the time, because he said that culture is like concrete. When it's early, you can shape it, you can mold it, but then that culture really sets in. And so if you don't intentionally build your culture early on, and build that purpose into everything that you're doing early on, then it becomes set like concrete. And so when you are bringing people to your organization, I always say that when every person that you invite into your organization, they become a co-author of your culture, because culture is really like all those unspoken norms and behaviors and agreements and the ways that we interact with each other. So every person that you're bringing into the organization, they become a co-author of that culture. And so that's why, as you're growing, you need to be really aware and intentional of the culture that you're trying to build. And also recognize that maybe when you're really small, you as the leader, the leader is always going to have an outsized impact on the culture, and it's really important for them to live it. But as the culture grows and grows and grows, there may be people that leader doesn't interact with every day. And so that leader isn't that direct standard bearer for the culture. As the company grows, you really have to rely on everyone to collectively uphold the culture. And so being really aware of it, because culture can be a great for success, and it also really keep you from growth and success. And so you better be really intentional about the way that you're building it, and that has to start at day one.
Great, thank you. I want to open now. I have more questions. I can continue talking with you, but I want to open now to the rest of the participants and see what questions may be coming from them. Does anyone want to get involved? I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, hi Andrew. I'm excited about what you're doing and where you're at, and all the connections that are happening. Also been in corporate for 30 years in toxic corporate cultures, and have understood how the lack of love in that is damaging, and how it's funny how the manipulators and the narcissists rise to the top every single time. And when they are challenged, they fight, and they fight tooth and nail to stay that way. How do you unstick that? How do you hit that group and get them to understand that it really is compassion and caring and love that generates the ebb and flow necessary to be resilient and strong and keep growing?
Yeah, there's certainly things that you can do inside of an organization. Sharon, thanks so much for that question, because it comes up quite a bit. And when you are, in certain places in an organization, it can be difficult sometimes, because maybe you're trying to influence or create some kind of grassroots movement, which is certainly important. But it goes back. Sometimes when I use that super chicken example, right? Like that's what we create. That's what we celebrate. Because if we celebrate individual achievement, like they did in that experiment, then we're going to celebrate the pecking away at our neighbors, and the maybe stealing business, or salespeople that are fighting against each other, rather than maybe saying, oh well, I think that this other salesperson probably has a better chance of closing this deal. Maybe I'll pass it over to them. And so the ways that we set up our organizations can be really detrimental to the types of things that we're trying to achieve. If you have individual sales commissions and sales metrics with nothing incentivizing the growth of the company overall, or the team overall, then it's going to become really difficult, because there's that old saying that it's really difficult to get somebody to understand something when their salary depends on not understanding it. So if you create the kind of culture where you're saying all these wonderful things, but then all of the systems and what I call the scaffolding of the culture, in terms of some of those performance metrics, and the ways that the things that get rewarded, and the things that you hire for, are all working against that, then really your culture is just a bunch of nice words on a website. And so I think, on one level, it really requires some buy-in from the top, of and modeling it from the top as well. Gets back to Natalia's question a little bit as well, in terms of well-being, is if the leader, there's been organizations that try to be progressive, for example, and say, we don't have any maximum vacation policy, like use it at your own judgment. And sometimes they found that actually lowers the vacation time that people use, because when you've got 3 weeks, you can use your 3 weeks. But if there isn't any time, then people kind of aren't really sure and what to do. And so in those cases, they look to the leader. And if the leader's never taking vacation, then, oh, I better not take vacation either. But if the leader's like, oh, I got to leave early today to go to my kid's soccer game, then that becomes normalized. And so that becomes a big part of it. But what becomes an even more telling and strong example is sometimes when you have to get rid of maybe that best salesperson, because even though they're bringing in the most revenue, they're really creating that toxic environment for the other people on the team. And back to the chickens, right? If you get rid of that one that's pecking away, and that's creating those kinds of that unsafe environment, then oftentimes you find, even though it might be difficult in the short run, getting rid of that maybe top performing salesperson, or whatever the case may be, not only does that send a really strong signal to everyone else that kind of behavior isn't tolerated around here, but what you'll often find is in the not even the long run, the medium run, that the rest of the team, when that person is gone, they elevate their game, because they now are recognizing how much they don't have to spend their energy fighting against that kind of negativity. And so it does require many times some of those kind of examples of not only saying the right things, but also putting your money where your mouth is, and making some difficult decisions that might prioritize the purpose over the profits. But I say that with a caveat of the purpose over the short-term profits, because a lot of times in the long run it ends up working out for the better. And that's really what conscious capitalism is all about. And kind of the kinds of things that I try to bring in the book is conscious capitalism. For those that aren't familiar, is based on 4 key tenets. This was from work done by a gentleman named Raj Sisodia, who wrote the original books and founded the movement. And it's based on 4 key tenets. First of which was that they had a higher purpose beyond just making profits. So you need profits to survive, but the purpose of the company can and probably even should go beyond just making profits. Then the next step was that they had a stakeholder orientation. So rather than just prioritizing the stockholders, they had to balance the needs of the customers, the community, the employees, the environment, really this whole ecosystem around the organization that is really essential to the long-term health. If all of those stakeholders aren't healthy, then in the long run, your business isn't going to be healthy either, because you're not going to have customers, you're not going to have engaged employees, and those sorts of things. The next element was conscious leadership. So, these leaders need to fully embody the purpose of the organization. They need to be the servant leaders, and they really need to, when they're trying to live this purpose. There's a great quote that he uses in the book. He talks about, leaders have to grow for the organization to grow. And if you as a leader aren't committed to your own continual growth and development, then you can become the bottleneck of the growth of the organization. You can say all these wonderful things about the purpose and the culture, but when there's a stressful situation, or there's something that happens inside of the organization, that creates some, that, I don't know, the industry is having a tough year, or one of your products or something goes wrong. If the first reaction of that leader is negativity and command and control, and going into some of those kind of older school types of ways of leading, then that's going to speak volumes, and that's going to be toxic on the culture. And so the leader has to continue to grow, and grow in their skills, but also grow in their ability to communicate and regulate their own emotions, and all those sorts of things is key to that third element, which is conscious leadership. And the last is the conscious culture. And that's a culture that prioritizes the autonomy, the empowerment, the well-being of all of the people inside of the organization. And one company here in the United States that I've been working with for quite a long time is Wegmans Food Markets. And so they've been on the Fortune Best Companies to Work For list, and they really prioritize their culture. And they many decades ago, their founder was one of the people that started to talk about, not the customer is always right, but instead we put our people first. The people that are inside of our organization, and then they are empowered to go give incredible customer service. And so kind of really focused on that element. And what Raj found when he wrote this book and did this study was that the companies that fit those four key tenets, not only were they doing great things, for their employees and all their stakeholders, but they actually ended up, over a 15-year period, they beat the S&P 500, which is kind of a, for the United States stock market, kind of like a market average. They beat the S&P 500 by 14-1 over a 15-year period. So not only were they doing well by doing good, but they're actually doing better. And so, if those are the types of things, Sharon, that you need to, you need to show, is all of these organizations that are, again, in the long run, being the most successful, they are the ones that are prioritizing well-being. They are the ones that are more in culture. And if instead you're coming into work every day and you're just exhausted by having to deal with some of these toxic people on your team, and it's diminishing your own motivation, and diminishing the motivation of other people on the team, then that's not going to fly in the long run. And so there's elements certainly that if that's your coworker, that it's, you can try to, as a peer, try to do certain things, but it often does require a leader that is willing to make the hard decisions and the sacrifices for the purpose of the organization, and for the well-being of all the employees.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging issue. I know hitting that brick wall, is demotivating. And when I've hit that brick wall, two things happen. One is either I get ejected from the organization in some way, shape, or form, or I leave. So companies get to survive or not without their skilled talent. And I noticed that the skilled talent will go elsewhere quicker than the unskilled talent.
So, absolutely. They've got a lot more options, right?
Right. So no, you're right. The leaders do have to recognize it, but what if they don't? And that's the key issue. And for me, it's always been, I'd rather bail from that company because they're on the long term never going to be successful.
Yeah, some people decide that they, whether it's because it's a product or a service or just a company purpose that they're really, excited about or invested in, that they want to try to change things from the inside. And others, like it sounds like yourself, might decide that, this isn't something that I'm worth, that I feel is worth fighting for, and worth, my own mental well-being. And that's going to speak volumes as well. If enough of the top talent leaves, then eventually the leader's either going to have to recognize it and do something about it, or else the company is not going to last much longer anyways. Whether or not it's changing things for you, you're certainly a positive part of sending that signal that the toxicity was not worth it for you and probably others as well.
Yeah, and sometimes you hang on for too long. But I've also gone into organizations as the jackhammer to break apart the concrete and consciously create new cultures, and have done that successfully, using, I think, what you have to offer in your book, which nobody can see yet. But I think it's totally going in the right direction. I love it, and really, really hopeful that a lot of the new corporate cultures will be consciously built based on values, and the values are more than just financial, which is one of the areas of expertise I've had in going into organizations to rip up that concrete, is to reset the measures of value, really. And once you reset the measures of value, that's one of the key triggers that I find helps to turn the behavior and then the culture as well.
It's such a great point, and thanks for extending that metaphor of the jackhammer for the concrete. That's perfect. I love it. But that's really such. I think it's important to recognize as well, that just like profits have become that peacock's tail, right? That is maybe something that we all aim for, but it can damage the health and viability of the company, right? Because if, oh well, we're having a tough quarter of sales, and so, well, why don't we just cut headcount and then our profits will still be up, right? And so, obviously in the long run, that's not going to lead to a healthy, successful company. But I think it's important to recognize too that, because some companies might focus on their, I don't know, an engagement score, right? And if you over focus on any one metric, that one metric can become something where, oh, well, now I know that, if our engagement scores go down this year, then they're going to, the leaders are going to talk to, to have some big, conversation with us, and yada, yada, yada. And, so that you can game the system on any metric, even if it starts off as a good one. So it's really important to have a holistic set of metrics. And that's part of, what I try to talk about, and what conscious capitalism talks about, in terms of, yes, profits are important, but so is that engagement score, but so is maybe our retention, and having a really dashboard of things that you pay attention to, because then it becomes harder to to optimize or game one part of the system, and not really get that overall health.
Yeah, and that leads back to your analogy of the chickens, right? Is the choosing the cooperative skills, choosing the cooperative and the supportive components actually elevates overall. So instead of just choosing the aggressive chickens, that the one metric you choose across a bunch of metrics that are aligned in value. So yeah, awesome, thank you.
What I love about this exchange, I mean, many things, but one thing I want to bring is Andrew was talking a lot about the role of the leader, and I couldn't agree more. But what Sharon brought also is our individual roles, because I think way too many people stay in jobs they hate, work for people they can't stand, because they think they don't have a choice. And one of the, I mean, I was for a while working more on the side of the leaders. And when as I was starting this community, one of my dreams is that we help more people realize the power they have, that actually a lot more depends on us than we realize. We can try to make a change in our organizations. If it doesn't work, we can leave. I mean, there are others that are better, because both as employees and as consumers, we every day we support the status quo. I mean, maybe not, maybe not 100%, but with every choice we make, we support it. So if everybody starts acting according to their values, actually, and believing that they have a choice, and there are other organizations that could be more, how should I say, welcoming to their needs, when these leaders are going to start recognizing that they need to change as well. So I believe in our role as employees, as hired people, to also be leading this change.
Yeah, and back to the millennials thing too. That there's 92% of millennials believe that business should be measured by more than just profit and should have a societal purpose. And you know, they want to be a part of that. And like I said, I think that I think that that's probably sometimes the millennial things get over focused on, because I think probably, you know, any generation when they're fresh out of college, you know, they're idealistic and they're hoping for, you know, this, I want to be a part of, you know, some big change. And I would say that if the number is lower than 92% for other generations, it's probably mostly just because they've become cynical, because they haven't had that experience. I think everybody wants to be a part of an organization. You know, is this something that I want to dedicate 40 or 50 or, you know, 60 hours a week to? Is it something that I'm passionate about, that I'm going to feel like at the, you know, at the end of my life that it was time well spent? Or was it just, you know, paying the bills and then I had to fit in all the meaningful stuff outside of work? You know, that's not sustainable either. And so one of the things that gives me a lot of hope is the ways that certainly technology has created different levels of transparency, right? Like there used to be a time where companies could just put out their great marketing messages about, you know, who they are or what they stand for. And, you know, a famous example from kind of when I was growing up was Nike. You know, they have this, you know, this excellence in achievement and all the things, you know, that they stand for. And then it was found out that, you know, they weren't treating workers very well in you know, developing countries, and they weren't really embodying that purpose in all aspects of their business. And nowadays it's a lot, it's even harder. You know, they were able to kind of keep that under wraps for years and years, but it's almost impossible to do that nowadays. Everybody's got a smartphone in their pocket. You know, everybody could take a picture and it gets sent around the world. And so if you aren't living your purpose, the transparency, you know, that disconnect there gets shown right away. And whether that's, you know, somebody's a bad customer service experience, or whether that's, you know, Glassdoor, where people go on and say what it's really like to work for that company. There's so many different ways where people are able to share that, and so that's one of the kind of key things that I talk about in the book. Is you've got the values and the purpose that you espouse, right? That's on your website, that you say you care about. The ways that that's reflected inside your company is your culture, you know, whether or not people inside the organization are feeling those values and purpose. But then the way that reflects outside your organization, that's your brand. You know, whether people outside your organization, but they interact with you, are feeling your values and purpose. And if the stated values aren't aligned with the internally felt culture and the externally felt brand, then people are going to notice that lack of authenticity. And authenticity is just huge, you know, in today's world. And that transparency, it really shows when you're not being authentic.
Yes, thank you for that. Are there any other questions from participants?
I just must say that I really forward to see that change in the world. I believe that the economic is very important for us, for everyone, you know, like the profit, as you said, the production, and there are also many jobs that are so meaningless unless you put some value on it. I mean, I'm thinking about manufacturing. I'm thinking about the things that has to be done mechanically because there is still no kind of technology or robots that can do, and I hope never does because there's a lot of work. But I believe that the change in millennials and in general in people that has the power in their hands because they have money or they have power just by it. I really hope that love permeate in them, in their hearts, in their minds, in their do, so they can understand that people nowadays not are only working for money but also for purpose. So I'm really excited about reading your book and to see how I can do changes in by the little
Yeah.
and then to the
I appreciate that so much. I think that you know, we're sitting right now, you know, in this time of coronavirus and really being you know, confronted with a lot of the ways that our societies and our economies, you know, weren't very healthy. You know, as much as, you know, they talk about the pre-existing conditions, right, that could make you more susceptible to coronavirus. Well, we had some societal pre-existing conditions in terms of the inequality that is, you know, rampant, in terms of, you know, societal health issues, and all different ways that we made ourselves you know, more susceptible to you know, this virus turning into the pandemic and creating the things that it did. And so as we you know, go and hopefully, you know, start to you know, the vaccines, I think today in the United States are starting to get moved around. Hopefully many of the other countries around the world will similarly be able to start doing that. And you know, but even so, when we're going back to normal, so to speak, normal, you know, shame on us if we don't make that new normal a better normal, a more inclusive normal, a more sustainable normal. You know, you know, as you're mentioning, Sandra, when people are, you know, talking about some of these maybe underappreciated jobs of the past, but that are still so necessary. We now have this great term for them. At least it was used a lot in the States. I don't know. Hopefully around the world, you know, people started talking about the essential workers, right? The essential workers that were working through the pandemic because they were so needed. And oftentimes it was you know, it was the care workers, it was the teachers, it was the, you know, people in healthcare, and a lot of jobs that were deemed essential, in my opinion, aren't paid nearly enough. You know, and so we need to treat those people both in pay, but also in prestige and you know, the social esteem that we give to them. We need to treat them as if they're essential. And so I really hope that you know, at least one silver lining of everything, and all of the destruction and all of the pain and all of the things that have happened, and I'm sure will continue to happen as we try to build back our economies and such. I hope that we do recognize how essential those people were. You know, because even me, you know, or you know, you think about some of the people that are the most well paid in our economies. If they disappeared for a little while, people might not notice. But if the garbage didn't get picked up, or you didn't have someone to, you know, a teacher to send your kid to school, or you know, all these different things, those are the people that keep our world running. And so they need to be paid that way, and they need to be treated that way too.
Yeah, I
totally
couldn't agree
agree.
more. Yeah. Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, Andrew. It's I couldn't agree also more. And I hope we weren't who the essential people and treat them differently. Did somebody else wanted to ask something? Yelena, did you want to ask something? Or?
Yes, actually I did, but somebody came into the room, so he kind of interrupted me, and now I can. Okay, I have a question, and it is about the balance. We talked earlier here on this network about balances, And I'm wondering, how do we find right balance between our values and how they're affecting our business, and the moment when we price for our services? Because currently I'm running my own business and it's based on my values, the values I learned that were good from my previous jobs, and they're fine, and in that way everything is doing fine. But when it comes to charging for my services, it sometimes appears that these values that I have somehow make my profit smaller, or sometimes getting me in trouble of charging for my services because I want to be a good person rather than like charge or ask for money or ask to be paid for what I'm doing. So I have to say that I'm a lawyer and I run my independent practice, but considering the fact that I'm working in Serbia, where the payment ability of the customers is not very good and they require legal help, how do we find the right balance between this, in that point when we ask for money clearly and openly, and when we want to stick to our value?
Yeah, it's very important, and it's something certainly, similarly dealing with, as a leader of a company, and similarly, in some of those conversations where you're trying to, get a contract signed or close a deal or whatever, and those sorts of things, especially when you're so passionate about it, right? And as you're mentioning, you want to be a good person, but also you just love doing this so much that, if they would accept the swipe at the grocery store of good person, then you wouldn't even be worried about it that much, because you would do it for free, if not for all these other bills that you had to pay. And so I think that there's a few things there. First is that this all becomes, I won't say easy, but it becomes easier when you have a clear, not only those clear values, but when you broadcast them and you start looking for the other folks that share your values. You want to have those organizations, because frankly, they're willing to pay more for it. One of my clients, they are a commercial cleaning company. So, they go in and into a lot of office buildings, and hospitals and all different kinds of places. And they clean up at, when people aren't there during the day, they go and clean up. Or in the hospitals, obviously a little bit different story, but it's something that is typically seen as a commodity. But because this gentleman that runs a company, he's so committed to his purpose. He's so committed to treating these workers, which are, in an industry where there's high turnover, where they're treated like they're expendable. They don't have great pay or benefits typically in the industry, and he's elevated that to such another level, in terms of, again, not only the pay, but also the social esteem that they're afforded. And so there are organizations where you would typically think of, the cleaning service as a commodity, right? You'd say, well, I'll just take whatever's the cheapest price. But he has people that pay 10, 20, 25% more, because they want to employ a cleaning company that treats their workers as well as that, the company itself does. So really trying to find that values alignment with the clients that you work with. And then also the other thing that I do, because as you're mentioning, sometimes even when there is values alignment, maybe the ability to pay isn't there, is that I will oftentimes work with those values aligned clients as much as I can. And then I have a certain percentage, for example, of work that I do that is either pro bono or heavily reduced, because there are certain people that I care so much about their mission, and their purpose, but I know that they're not willing to pay. And so being able to have healthy clients that are paying enables me to be able to do that. And what I'd say, maybe is a little bit of advice or something to think about is, also then telling and thanking those full paying clients and saying, because of what you're doing, here's this small social entrepreneurship enterprise that I'm able to work with, or here's this nonprofit that couldn't afford, the work that I was doing, but because you've been such a, loyal client for a while, I was able to do some pro bono work for them. And that really shows the clients that you do have that are paying, they feel even better now, that they're able to kind of almost subsidize that. And so they become more loyal, and they see that you really live what you stand for, and live and breathe it. And so those are some of the things sometimes of thinking about kind of a different tiered system of certainly telling your story and sharing your values to try to get those clients that resonate. And then thinking about when there's opportunities for you to give back a little bit as well. But making sure that you're telling that story too, because people want to hear about all the great things that you're doing as well, Delana.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, great. I like your advice, Andrew. Thank you
Yes.
for that as well.
It's great.
So we are, we even a little after the hour, so we need to head to an end. Andrew, would you tell us a little bit? I know that the book was supposed to be published, but it got delayed. Can you tell us a little bit when to expect it?
Yeah. So I put in my first draft of my manuscript on March 6th of 2020. And then about a week later is when everything shut down. So there was some things, slowed down in a lot of ways. And also there were certain things that I wanted to go back and maybe tweak and add a few chapters or add at least a few examples of how companies responded in the pandemic and such. So there's a little bit of tweaking along the way. In the next week, I will be sending out my very final manuscript based on some back and forth with the editor. It's being published by Conscious Capitalism Press. So we've been working together, and they're really excited about kind of this next evolution, if you will, of some of the things that they've been advocating for quite a while. So it should be in the spring of 2021. So hopefully the timing is great, because it'll be as hopefully, if things go as planned, that economies are starting to open up again, and we're starting to think about how what we want that new normal to look like, and hopefully we can kind of set it that way. I will put just quickly in the chat. You can go to my website. My company's called the Accelerate Team. So it's theaccelerateteam.com/book. And you can just, if you're interested, just throw your email address in there so that you can kind of get an update as soon as it's ready. And there'll be some pre-order bonuses and things like that as well. So if you're interested, there's also my TEDx talk is on there, so you can see a little bit more. You can read just kind of a brief description about things. And if anybody reads it and you want to chat about it or anything like that in terms of how to integrate it into your organization or into the things that you do, I'd be happy to do that. But this was so much fun, and I really appreciate the time and the interest. And it sounds like we're definitely have some resonance in terms of what your group stands for, and what I'm hoping to help move organizations in that direction. So always happy by the magic of the internet that I'm able to talk with people from my home and reach different countries, and really grateful for your time and your interest and your attention today.
Thank you, Andrew. It was a real pleasure to host you, and I'm sure we'll have more opportunities in the future to collaborate. Absolutely, you're right. There's total resonance, and we share a lot of beliefs and values. So it was a true pleasure to have you, and until next time. Thank you, everybody who managed to join us today, and I know more people are going to watch the recording. So thank you. Goodbye to everybody.
Okay, thank you very much for everything.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was awesome.
Thanks so much.